God's peace be upon you. Thank you so much for joining me again today here at the Reimagined Schools, where we are changing the way we educate because we are redefining and redesigning education that will benefit and contribute to the academic success of African American students and other students who have been historically and traditionally underserved. So, this is what we call in education report season. There are so many different reports that are coming out that are explaining issues that are of great relevance to all students. Some of them are directly, specifically towards the African American student population or the Latino student populations. But we are in the midst of report season in the field of education. So I want to be able to share some of this information with you so that you can do some further research on your own. I receive so many different emails from so many different organizations that I subscribe to their newsletters to, so that I can keep abreast of what's going on in the field of education. And in fact, I would strongly urge you, if you are truly interested in being informed about all things schooling that are related to K through 12 education, that you should begin doing internet searches for that phrase, K through 12 education news, to be able to begin to see what's really going on in the field of education. As you may know, when people are, producing their news programs, they're very specific and very selective as to what it is that they will cover. And so a lot of this information just doesn't get reported, but it is important. So today I want to talk to you about a report that came out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and the report is called Accelerating the Pace, the Future of Education in the American South. Now, this particular article that I'm referring to is from the News and Observer, which that's the name of the newspaper magazine. And the title of the article is North Carolina and the Rest of the South Need to Improve Education, report says. Now, I will provide a link to this particular article so that you can peruse it at your own leisure and do some further information. North Carolina and other southern states need to quickly do more to improve K through 12 education as the number of disadvantaged students increases in the region's public schools, according to a new report. Accelerating the Pace, the Future of Education in the American South, is a report that was released on Tuesday. And it found that student achievement has increased significantly overall in the South in the past several decades. But the report found that southern states must deal with historic inequities in education because student performance varies widely by race and income, and that these particular inequities in education hold back many parts of the region. Now, if you can recall from your days in social studies or in U.S. history, and certainly if you've been following me on the Reimagined Schools for my blog, or if you've been looking at my videos here on YouTube, you know that I've been talking about the achievement gap, the so-called achievement gap, which is really an opportunity gap. And specifically in my last video, I talked about the history of the fact that it was against the law for enslaved Africans to be able to read. It was actually against the law for the enslaved to be taught to read or write, and it came with penalties and fines. So when we look at a report from 2018 that's talking about the inequities in education in the South, you have to be able to begin to see those connections. People think that because enslavement happened so long ago, that it has had no effect, it has left no strings attached, if you will. But if we are truly going to be able to do something to make a difference in the education for students who are now living in these areas where it used to be against the law to learn how to read and write, and if we're truly going to make a difference in the opportunities for black students, period, whose ancestors were forced to labor in this country for free and weren't given the luxury of being able to read and write, We have to look at the connections between those things, because those things continue to impact how we educate today. They continue to impact how people perceive of these students, some people, not all of them, and that perception impacts how those students are instructed. So we have to see that all these things are connected, and that we have to begin to, break them down to look at each part. We can't ignore anything, because ignoring has produced what we see today. Okay? Just wanted to make that point. So the article goes on to say, in order to improve education, the report found the states need to get the South's finest to become teachers, to give students the support they need, to strengthen students' ability to go to college or get a job after high school, and match resources with students' needs. Now, we have talked at the Reimagined Schools about the lack of diversity in the teaching workforce. In my last video, I explained in great detail about the impact of not having teachers who look like them for black students, how very, very detrimental it is to their academic success and their future. There are several reports that came out last year and even in previous years that discuss in great detail the importance of black students being able to have at least one black teacher. That there is evidence that that contributes to their ability to graduate on time and to experience more success than if they don't have the experience of being taught by a black teacher. So this idea of needing really high quality teachers is certainly a valid one. And I will probably go on to add that there has to be more of a push and more of an information given to people who may potentially want to be teachers as to why it is so important for them to consider the job. Because we have children who really need you, and because we understand what happens sometimes to black students and Latino students when they are not exposed to people who share similar cultures and values as them. Okay? So, this article goes on to say that we can't ignore the fact that the South and North Carolina lag behind the rest of the nation in school funding, said Keith Poston, President and Executive Director of the Public School Forum of North Carolina, which is a nonpartisan advocate for better schools. It shows up in many ways. And of course, I talked at length about public funding. Well, I wouldn't say I talked at length. I mentioned that is certainly an argument for why we see so much disparity in the urban schools as compared to some of the more wealthy suburban school districts, and it has to do with inequitable funding. Inequitable funding has been an issue for a long time, and it doesn't really matter what state you're in. There are teachers who have been, and educators in general, people who are concerned, who have been arguing for more equitable funding for many, many years. I can remember being a teacher, which wasn't so long ago, by the way, but I remember that was something that was always being discussed because it was such a disparity in how much money my school district received, which was a large urban school district that was servicing mostly black students. I would say actually it was probably like 99.9%. The amount of funding that we received compared to some of our neighboring districts or some districts that were a little further away, suburban areas that were mostly white, was just, it was night and day. It was just incredible. And so that is an issue. And it contributes to a lot of the problems that we see in urban school districts, because sometimes there just is not enough money, and then there's sometimes that there is enough money, but the money is not managed in the way that it should be. So there are so many arguments on either side, but I just wanted to throw that in there. Getting back to the article. The report from the Columbia Group, which is a network of 7 Southern nonprofit organizations that includes the Public School Forum, also includes polling data of registered voters. The first annual education poll of the South found strong support from voters to improve the state of K through 12 education in the region. The poll found that 85% of voters say states should take action to correct differences in the quality of education within the state, and 84% say their state should adjust school funding to ensure greater fairness between wealthy and poor communities. The percentages were even higher to both questions for voters from North Carolina. In North Carolina, Keith Poston said, "This is a critical time to talk about school funding as the General Assembly begins its work on possibly overhauling school funding," Poston said. And if you've been following the news, you know that there have been discussions across many states that have to do with funding. And many states are looking at how they fund schools and beginning to discuss, and some of them are, looking to overhaul their funding, their school funding as well, to make it more equitable. The report provides common ground across the political spectrum on issues such as improving teacher recruitment efforts and looking at how schools are funded and how money is spent, according to Terry Stoops, Vice President of Research for the John Locke Foundation. "This is a report that those on the left and the right will be receptive to," he said. Last year, members of the Columbia Group came together to commission the poll and to make a new call for improving education in the South. The report found that improving education will require addressing how some achievement gaps have worsened in the South. For instance, the gaps widened for North Carolina students from low-income families in national 4th and 8th grade tests. Some gaps also widened among the state's Black and Hispanic students. North Carolina has certainly been a leader in the last 20 to 30 years, but there are states making bigger gains right now, Poston said. Tennessee has been making some achievement gains in recent years, but all of us are seeing issues where gaps with lower income students are widening. And of course, as we allow more and more time to go on without trying to see what everyone's role is in eradicating the achievement gap, it gets wider and it gets wider, and our students get further and further behind. Some of them, many of them, get further and further behind, and we just cannot allow this to continue. That's why it's always a sense of urgency when we're talking about the achievement gap, because as you already know, children don't have a lot of time. They have so many years that they're in school, and they're being given an education, but we want to make sure that that education is one that is solid, that is rigorous. It has to be rigorous. It has to be one of high expectations, because that's how you bring forth the best in a student. And it has to be one that is going to allow them to compete with anyone in the world. That is, if a student in South Carolina decides that they want to enter a competition with students all over the world, they should be more than qualified to be able to do that. But when we have these gaps in achievement for students, it really undermines their futures, because students who are struggling in reading and they're struggling in math don't necessarily see themselves as someone who can go to college. And then we have students who may go to college, and then they have to go to college, and then they end up having to take remedial classes. So it's like this never ending cycle, but it is a cycle that can be ended. It can end. And that is that it has to be eradicated, and everyone has a role for that. So as we've been telling you, parents at the Reimagined Schools, we've been telling you, you have such an important role to play in how your child succeeds in school. A lot of it has to do with you. I would say that your influence over how your student does in school is greater than the teachers. And some people will argue with me that they didn't think so. But it is you as a parent who plants the seed as to how your child feels about education, about learning, about expanding their knowledge in their mind. It's something that you have to instill into your family, your child, so that it becomes a part of the culture of your family and of your household. Because we cannot afford to continue to lose students who don't go on to higher education, who don't go on to internships where they can learn skills and to be able to, become entrepreneurs in that particular area, because you're not doing well in reading and math, and it makes them want to drop out, or they do drop out. So it's obviously something that needs to be addressed. The article goes on to say one way to help close the gaps, according to this report, is to help children get off to a good start. But the report noted that only 22% of North Carolina 4-year-olds were enrolled in a state pre-kindergarten program in 2016. North Carolina also ranked 33rd nationally in the Annie E. Casey Foundation's annual Kids Count report, which covers different indicators of children's health. Now, in a previous video that I did, I think it's called ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, I talked about how students have to come to school prepared. That when they come to school, they should know the basic, part of education. They should know what their legal name is. I cannot tell you how many of my elementary school principal peers and even elementary school teachers that I'm familiar with, how many stories they have about kids who come to school and they don't know their name, their legal name. So it is important that parents, if you have a nickname for your child, you need to make sure that you establish that it is a nickname, that you tell your little one consistently before they get to school, your name is whatever it is, okay? Maybe it's Jamari Brooks. Your name is Jamari Brooks, but your nickname is Man Man, and that's what we call you. Your family and your friends call you Man Man, but your legal name is Jamari Brooks. And if and when you go to school and your teacher asks you what your name is, you'll tell them that your name is Jamari Brooks. And you have to tell them how to spell their name, and they can do the best that they can with that, being so young. They should know the beginning ABCs, although they may not recall them all, but they should have some sense of what the ABCs are and be able to express many of them accurately. At some point because they're so young, if they're 4 years old or 5 years old coming to school, they may not be able to grasp them all at that young age, but they should have a good enough fluency that you feel comfortable, that they're on the right track. Same thing with their numbers, maybe they should know how to count from 1 to 10. Some of them will exceed that, but you have to set some parameters. Please, please, please do not send your children to school completely unprepared. It only sets them